Billionaire saw a single mom carrying a mattress alone. He froze when he saw where she was going. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Before we step into today's story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving your city and state in the comments, or your country if you're joining us from abroad. Today's story begins when a wealthy businessman notices a single mother struggling to carry a mattress down the street while her young child follows beside her. He almost continues on his way, but something about her determination makes him stop. Then he realizes where she is taking it, and the truth leaves him speechless. What begins as a brief encounter soon forces him to confront a part of life he has spent years ignoring. Let's begin. Some people carry furniture. Others carry the last proof that they once had a home. The late afternoon sun poured across downtown Chicago, turning the glass towers into mirrors of gold while the sidewalks shimmered beneath the July heat. Office workers hurried toward parking garages with iced coffees in hand. Delivery trucks rumbled through narrow intersections, and rideshare drivers leaned impatiently on their horns as another workday came to a close. No one expected the woman dragging a faded twin mattress behind her. Naomi Carter wrapped both hands around a frayed nylon strap tied carefully around one end of the mattress, her palms already raw beneath worn work gloves. Every few steps, she stopped just long enough to pull an old quilt higher across the fabric so the dirty pavement wouldn't stain it. Sweat darkened the collar of her gray t-shirt, and loose curls clung to her forehead, but she never complained. She only adjusted her grip and kept walking. The mattress was old enough that its floral pattern had nearly disappeared beneath years of careful washing. One corner sagged where the springs had weakened, yet every inch of it had been scrubbed clean. It looked less like discarded furniture and more like something someone loved too much to throw away. Drivers slowed for a second before accelerating again. A few pedestrians glanced over with puzzled expressions, then lowered their eyes to their phones. One teenager quietly recorded a short video before disappearing into the crowd. Nobody offered to help. Naomi didn't ask. She had learned long ago that dignity often survived by expecting nothing from strangers. 2 blocks away, a sleek black SUV eased toward a red light outside the newly completed Brooks Horizon Tower. Inside the back seat, Adrian Brooks loosened his tie while scanning tomorrow's presentation on his tablet. At 39, he had become one of the youngest real estate billionaires in America, praised for transforming neglected neighborhoods into profitable developments. Investors admired him. Business magazines called him visionary. His calendar had barely contained enough empty space for lunch in nearly 3 months. "We'll be at the ribbon cutting in 6 minutes," his assistant reminded him from the front passenger seat. Adrian nodded without looking up. "Good." The SUV rolled forward another few feet before traffic stopped again. A movement outside the tinted window caught his attention. He looked up just as Naomi struggled to pull the mattress over a cracked section of sidewalk. The front edge snagged against broken concrete. She didn't yank it impatiently. Instead, she knelt beside it, brushed away tiny pieces of gravel with her bare hand, then gently lifted the mattress free before continuing. Adrian frowned. "Hold on." The driver glanced into the rearview mirror. "Sir, stop the car. Here, just for a minute." The SUV eased toward the curb. Adrian watched silently through the glass. Something about the woman didn't match the picture his mind expected. She wasn't moving the mattress like someone hauling junk to a dumpster. She moved as if every scrape against the pavement mattered, as if damaging it would break something much larger than fabric and springs. She paused beside a crosswalk and carefully tucked the quilt around one side again after a passing cyclist splashed dust across it. Then she smiled. Adrian followed her gaze. Across the street stood a little boy, no older than 6, sitting patiently on the steps outside a public library with a backpack nearly as big as his shoulders. His dark sneakers swung above the sidewalk while he waved both hands the moment he spotted her. Naomi raised one hand back, her exhausted face softening into the kind of smile that seemed to erase the weight of the entire day. The boy hurried over. "Is it almost ready, Mom?" he asked, looking at the mattress with unmistakable excitement. Naomi nodded, brushing sweat from her cheek before kneeling to his height. "Almost, sweetheart. We just have a little farther." He reached out to smooth one wrinkled corner of the quilt with tiny, careful hands. "I don't want it to get dirty." Naomi smiled again. "Neither do I." Adrian's fingers slowly lowered from the tablet resting in his lap. He had spent years evaluating buildings by square footage, market value, occupancy rates, and return on investment. Yet for reasons he couldn't explain, he found himself staring at a worn mattress being protected with more care than some people gave expensive antiques. "Sir," his assistant asked quietly, "we're running behind schedule." Adrian didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the mother and son as they disappeared around the next corner together, one pulling the mattress, the other proudly carrying the rolled-up quilt as if helping build something important. For the first time that afternoon, the ribbon-cutting ceremony no longer seemed like the most significant destination waiting for him. Naomi waited until the evening traffic had thinned before continuing the last mile. The sidewalks gradually emptied, storefront lights flickered on one by one, and the warmth trapped inside the concrete began to soften beneath a gentle breeze drifting in from Lake Michigan. Eli walked beside her without complaining, holding the rolled quilt against his chest with both arms as though he had been trusted with something priceless. Every few minutes he looked up at his mother with quiet confidence instead of worry, and that alone made every aching step worth taking. "Can we still read tonight?" he asked after they crossed another intersection. Naomi smiled without slowing down. "Of course we can. The dragon book? If you remember all the funny voices." Eli grinned. "I always do." The answer made Naomi laugh softly, the sound almost disappearing beneath the distant train crossing overhead. It had been nearly 3 weeks since they had left the apartment that had once felt permanent. Rent had climbed faster than her paychecks. Her evening shifts cleaning offices and her morning hours stocking grocery shelves stretched every day until there was barely enough energy left to think. She had packed everything that mattered into a storage unit the size of a closet after selling nearly every piece of furniture she owned. Everything except the mattress. Friends had suggested replacing it later. Shelters had offered folding cots. Even strangers had told her it was only an old mattress. They did not understand. Every bedtime story Eli had ever heard had been told while they sat together on those faded floral sheets. Every birthday morning had begun there. Every nightmare had ended with Naomi pulling him close beneath the same worn blanket. Children remembered feelings before they remembered addresses. If she could not give him walls, she would at least protect the place where he still felt safe enough to dream. They finally turned beneath an aging railroad bridge where several concrete support columns created deep pockets of shade. Hidden behind one of them stood a carefully arranged shelter made from weatherproof tarps, plywood panels, and donated plastic storage bins. Nothing about it looked careless. The entrance had been swept clean. A pair of children's rain boots rested neatly beside an old folding chair. Solar-powered camping lanterns hung from hooks attached to the wooden frame, waiting for sunset. Naomi set the mattress down slowly before stretching her sore shoulders. Eli immediately spread the quilt across the top with surprising concentration, smoothing every wrinkle exactly as she had taught him. "Better?" he asked proudly. Naomi stepped closer and gently straightened one last corner. "Perfect." Eli climbed onto the mattress and bounced once before catching himself. "Sorry." Naomi laughed again. "Indoor feet, remember? Even outside. Especially outside." He nodded seriously as though it were an important family rule. She unpacked 2 library books from his backpack before placing them beside a small battery lantern. Then she opened a cooler containing peanut butter sandwiches, apple slices, and 2 small cartons of milk that had been chilled with reusable ice packs from the library staff. The librarians never asked uncomfortable questions. They simply welcomed Eli every afternoon, remembered his favorite books, and quietly let Naomi refill the cooler with cold water before they closed. Kindness often arrived without announcements. As the sky shifted from blue to violet, headlights swept briefly beneath the bridge. A black SUV slowed almost imperceptibly before continuing down the street. Adrian sat in the back seat staring through the window, unable to look away from what he had just seen. He had told himself he was only curious when he instructed his driver to follow at a respectful distance after the ceremony ended. Curiosity should have disappeared hours ago. Instead, it had become something heavier. He watched the little boy arrange library books beside the mattress as though placing treasures onto a bedroom shelf. He watched Naomi carefully tuck the quilt beneath the edges so nothing would drag against the dusty ground. There was no anger in her movements, no self-pity, only the quiet determination of someone refusing to let hardship decide what kind of mother she would become. Sir, the driver asked gently, should we keep going? Adrian did not answer right away. His eyes lingered on the bridge, then drifted toward the illuminated skyline, standing only a few miles away, where one of the tallest buildings carried his own family name across the top. The distance between those two places suddenly felt impossible to measure with miles alone. As the SUV rolled forward, Eli's laughter echoed softly beneath the bridge while Naomi opened the first library book and began reading aloud. Adrian could no longer hear the words, but somehow the sound followed him long after the city lights swallowed the road ahead. Morning arrived wrapped in cool lake air that slipped beneath the bridge before the first streaks of sunlight reached the city skyline. Naomi was already awake, folding the quilt with practiced care while Eli still slept peacefully on the old mattress, one arm wrapped around a stuffed elephant with faded blue ears. She watched him for a quiet moment, grateful that children measured comfort differently than adults. He did not see concrete columns or traffic overhead. He saw the same blanket, the same bedtime story, and the same mother who kissed his forehead every night. Sometimes love was the only address a child needed. By 7 o'clock, Eli was dressed for the day, his backpack resting neatly beside him. Naomi brushed invisible dust from his shoulders before taking his hand. Ready for another adventure? She asked. Eli smiled. The library first. After breakfast, they shared oatmeal prepared with hot water from a small electric kettle powered by a portable battery pack. It was simple, warm, and enough. Before leaving, Naomi carefully covered the mattress with a waterproof tarp, fastening each corner with clothespins she had collected over the years. She checked every edge twice before finally nodding to herself. See you tonight, Eli whispered toward the hidden mattress as if saying goodbye to an old friend. Naomi squeezed his shoulder without saying anything. Nearly an hour later, after dropping Eli at the library's children's reading program, Naomi hurried toward her morning shift at a neighborhood grocery store. The work was honest and steady. She stocked shelves, carried heavy boxes, greeted customers with the same gentle smile, and accepted every extra shift her manager could offer. By early afternoon, she clocked out and headed toward her second job cleaning offices downtown. Her feet already ached, but she kept moving. A few blocks away, an elderly woman struggled with two reusable grocery bags outside a small bus stop. One bag slipped from her hand, scattering oranges across the sidewalk. People walked around them without slowing. Naomi immediately set down her own backpack and hurried over. Please let me help you, she said warmly. Oh, honey, you have enough to carry already, the woman replied with an embarrassed smile. Naomi knelt, gathering each orange before gently wiping away the dust with a clean handkerchief she carried in her pocket. These deserve to make it home too, she said with a soft laugh. Together they packed everything back into the bags. When the city bus arrived, Naomi lifted both bags onto the first step before helping the woman climb aboard. Thank you, the woman whispered. My grandson says people are too busy these days. Naomi smiled. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they just need someone else to go first. The bus doors closed, carrying the woman away before Naomi quietly continued toward work, arriving 5 minutes late without mentioning why. Across the street, inside a quiet corner office overlooking Michigan Avenue, Adrian stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows between meetings. He had been trying unsuccessfully to focus on financial reports all morning. Instead, his thoughts kept returning to the bridge, the library books, and the carefully protected mattress. As he reached for his coffee, movement below caught his attention. He recognized Naomi immediately. He watched as she helped the elderly stranger without hesitation, smiling as though she had all the time in the world despite the worn shoes, the tired shoulders, and the backpack that carried nearly everything she owned. She never looked toward the office towers surrounding her. She never searched for recognition. She simply continued walking once the woman was safe. Adrian remained motionless long after she disappeared into the afternoon crowd. His assistant entered quietly with a folder. The board is ready for the housing development review. Adrian accepted the folder but did not open it. Tell me something, he said after a long silence. How many affordable units did Horizon East replace? His assistant hesitated. I would have to check the original files. Adrian nodded slowly. Please do. She looked surprised. Is something wrong? Adrian's eyes drifted once more toward the street below. I am beginning to wonder whether we have been measuring success with the wrong numbers. Outside, Naomi disappeared into another office building carrying nothing more than her lunch container and a determination that remained untouched by exhaustion. She did not know that someone high above the city had started asking questions because of her. She only knew there was work to finish before the library closed, because a little boy would soon be waiting with another storybook, another smile, and complete confidence that his mother would always find her way back to him. The next morning began with rain tapping softly against the glass walls of Brooks' global headquarters. From the 42nd floor, Chicago looked quieter than usual, the streets below blurred beneath a silver curtain that softened every sharp edge of the city. Adrian Brooks stood alone beside the conference room window long before anyone else arrived. A steaming cup of black coffee rested untouched on the polished table, while a thick folder lay open before him. He had asked for the original files connected to Horizon East, the redevelopment project celebrated just days earlier as another triumph for the company. He had expected numbers, permits, and construction schedules. Instead, he found names, families, addresses, relocation reports, assistance requests. One document after another described temporary housing options, moving stipends, and community resources that looked complete on paper. Yet as Adrian slowly turned each page, he remembered the old mattress beneath the railroad bridge and the little boy proudly smoothing a quilt as if it belonged inside a real bedroom. Something did not fit. "Good morning," his chief operating officer said as several executives entered the room. "The board is ready." Adrian quietly closed the folder. The quarterly meeting began with polished presentations, rising revenue charts, and projections for another year of record growth. Applause followed each successful report. Investors joining by video praised the company's efficiency and disciplined cost management. Adrian listened without interrupting until the final slide appeared on the screen. "Any additional questions?" the presenter asked confidently. Adrian folded his hands together. "Yes." The room became still. When Horizon East replaced the old employee housing complex, how many former residents secured permanent housing within 6 months? Several executives exchanged uncertain glances. The chief financial officer adjusted his glasses. "I do not have those figures available." "Why not?" Adrian asked calmly. "Our responsibility ended after relocation assistance was provided," another executive answered. "The project met every legal requirement." Adrian remained silent for several seconds. He had given nearly the same answer himself years earlier when the proposal first reached his desk. Back then the decision had seemed obvious. Aging buildings required expensive maintenance. Selling the property would finance larger developments with stronger returns. The numbers had aligned perfectly. He remembered signing the approval without hesitation. At the time, success had appeared simple enough to measure on a spreadsheet. After the meeting concluded, Adrian drove across the city instead of returning directly to his office. The rain had stopped, leaving sidewalks glistening beneath fresh sunlight. His destination was a modest brick house in Oak Park where his mother, Evelyn Brooks, had lived since refusing every invitation to move into one of his luxury properties. She welcomed him with the familiar scent of homemade chicken soup drifting through the kitchen. "You look tired," she said gently as she poured iced tea into 2 glasses. Adrian smiled faintly. "Busy week." Evelyn studied him with the quiet patience only a mother seemed to possess. "That is not what is weighing on you." He looked around the small dining room. The furniture was simple. The photographs on the walls had remained in the same places for years. Nothing inside the house suggested enormous wealth, yet everything felt peaceful. His eyes settled on an old wooden table scarred by countless scratches. He remembered doing homework there while his mother worked double shifts at a neighborhood clinic after his father died. They had never owned much, but she had always managed to make their tiny apartment feel warm. "Do you remember our first mattress?" Adrian asked unexpectedly. Evelyn looked surprised before a soft smile appeared. "The one your uncle found at a church donation center?" Adrian nodded. "I hated it." "You did," she laughed quietly. "You thought every spring would poke through the blanket. You told me a home was never measured by the bed." Evelyn reached across the table and rested her hand over his. "No, I told you people sleep best where they feel safe." The words settled heavily between them. Adrian looked down at his untouched glass of tea. He could suddenly picture Naomi carefully brushing dust away from that old floral mattress before letting her son climb onto it. He remembered the boy asking whether it was almost ready, not because he wanted furniture, but because he believed it meant home. Evelyn noticed the distant look in her son's eyes. "Who are you thinking about?" Adrian took a slow breath. "Someone I have never spoken to." As he drove back toward downtown later that afternoon, the skyline no longer filled him with the same quiet satisfaction it always had. Every tower his company had built represented progress, ambition, and success. Yet somewhere beneath one of the railroad bridges hidden behind those shining buildings, a mother was still protecting a worn mattress because it was the last place where her little boy could believe tomorrow would be better than today. For the first time in many years, Adrian wondered whether the greatest mistake of his career had been hidden inside one of his greatest achievements all along. Saturday arrived wrapped in bright sunshine, the kind that made the city feel lighter even when people carried invisible burdens. The public library buzzed with children attending weekend reading programs while parents gathered around community tables with coffee and conversation. Eli sat cross-legged in the corner surrounded by books about castles, astronauts, and dinosaurs, completely absorbed in a story, while Naomi volunteered to help organize donated children's books before beginning her afternoon cleaning shift. She always found small ways to give back, even when life left her with almost nothing to spare. Shortly before noon, one of the librarians approached with an apologetic smile. "Naomi, we received a shipment of new shelves this morning. We need to clear the reading room for installation before Monday. Would you mind taking your things a little earlier today?" Naomi nodded immediately. "Of course. Thank you for letting us stay as long as you did." The librarian hesitated before handing her a small paper bag. "Some families donated extra lunches after today's community event. We thought Eli might enjoy one." Naomi accepted it with quiet gratitude. "Please thank everyone for us." A few minutes later, mother and son walked back through the neighborhood carrying the paper lunch bag, a stack of borrowed books, and the familiar rolled quilt. The mattress remained safely hidden beneath the bridge, but Naomi wanted to wash the quilt at a nearby laundromat before the evening. Eli skipped beside her, stopping every few feet to admire dogs, flowers growing through sidewalk cracks, and passing trains. Children still found reasons to wonder, even when adults struggled to find hope. Across town, Adrian had canceled 2 meetings without explaining why. Instead of returning to the office after breakfast, he drove alone toward the old district where Horizon East now stood. Luxury apartments rose where modest brick buildings had once sheltered hundreds of working families. Fresh landscaping surrounded polished walkways. A fountain sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Residents relaxed on balconies overlooking manicured courtyards. Everything looked exactly as the architects had promised. Yet Adrian could not stop remembering the relocation reports stacked neatly inside his office. He parked several blocks away and began walking. He followed streets he had not visited since construction ended years earlier. Eventually, he noticed Naomi and Eli again. Neither of them saw him. Curious, but keeping his distance, Adrian continued down the sidewalk as they crossed toward a small laundromat tucked between a discount grocery store and an aging hardware shop. Naomi loaded the quilt into a washing machine before sitting beside Eli at a folding table. They shared sandwiches from the library lunch bag while reading one of the borrowed books together. Every few pages, Eli pointed excitedly at colorful illustrations, and Naomi laughed softly, giving each character a different voice. There was no sign of embarrassment, no bitterness, only a mother refusing to let difficult circumstances steal ordinary moments from her child. 40 minutes later, the clean quilt emerged warm from the dryer. Naomi folded it carefully against her chest, and the two of them started walking again. Adrian remained several storefronts behind, uncertain why he still followed. Then he realized they were heading toward the edge of the Horizon East development. Construction fencing from the final landscaping phase still bordered one side of the property, separating polished sidewalks from an unused service road. Naomi unlocked a narrow gate in the temporary fence with permission granted earlier by one of the maintenance supervisors who quietly allowed her to cross instead of walking nearly another mile around the block. Beyond the gate stood the old railroad bridge where the mattress waited beneath its protective tarp. Eli ran ahead with a smile bright enough to compete with the afternoon sun. Naomi uncovered the mattress and spread the freshly washed quilt across it. The clean fabric caught the light as a gentle breeze lifted its edges. Eli kicked off his sneakers and climbed onto the mattress with the delight of a child returning to his favorite room. He stretched out on his back, hugged his stuffed elephant, and looked up at the bridge overhead. "I like our new room, Mom," he said happily. "The trains sound like giant whales singing." Naomi sat beside him, smoothing the quilt beneath his shoulders. "They do not they? When we get a real apartment someday, can we still keep this blanket?" She smiled and kissed the top of his head. "We will keep it as long as you want." Standing beyond the fence where neither of them could see him, Adrian slowly looked from the hidden shelter to the gleaming apartment towers rising less than half a mile away. Then he unfolded one of the old relocation maps he had slipped into his jacket before leaving the office. His eyes moved between the printed street grid and the railroad bridge. A quiet realization settled over him with unmistakable clarity. The place where Naomi and Eli now slept had once stood only a short walk from the employee housing complex his company had demolished. Without intending to, they had returned to the very neighborhood that had once given families like theirs a place to belong. Adrian lowered the map, his chest tightening as the laughter of a little boy echoed beneath the bridge. For the first time since signing those papers years ago, the consequences of one decision no longer looked like numbers on a report. They looked like a child calling a mattress beneath a railroad bridge his room, because someone had worked every day to make it feel like home. Monday morning arrived with crisp blue skies and the first hint of autumn hiding inside the breeze drifting across the city. Naomi walked Eli to school with the same steady smile she wore every morning, even though she had slept only a few hours after finishing a late cleaning shift. The little boy held her hand until they reached the school entrance, then looked up with bright, hopeful eyes. "Will you be here when school is over?" Naomi brushed the front of his jacket flat and nodded. "I always will." Eli hugged her tightly before disappearing through the front doors with the other children. Naomi remained on the sidewalk for a few extra seconds, watching until he was safely inside. Only then did she turn toward another long day of work. Across downtown, Adrian had already called an early executive meeting that surprised nearly everyone on his calendar. Instead of discussing acquisitions or quarterly profits, he placed a single folder in the center of the conference table. "I want to establish an emergency housing assistance program for displaced working families," he said. Silence settled across the room. The chief financial officer leaned forward. "For current employees?" Adrian looked around the table. "For families affected by our redevelopment projects." Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. The company's general counsel carefully folded his hands. "That creates unnecessary legal exposure." "Helping people creates legal exposure?" Adrian asked quietly. "Admitting responsibility might," the attorney answered. "Even if the assistance is voluntary, it could be interpreted as acknowledging fault." Another executive nodded. "We followed every regulation. Every relocation package met state requirements. Reopening old cases would encourage additional claims." Adrian listened without interrupting. Only a week earlier, he probably would have agreed with every argument being presented. They were practical, efficient, safe. Yet every sentence sounded strangely hollow against the memory of a little boy proudly calling a hidden corner beneath a railroad bridge his room. "Thank you," Adrian finally said. "I understand your concerns." He closed the folder and dismissed the meeting earlier than expected. No decisions had been made, but the weight inside his chest had only grown heavier. That afternoon, instead of sending an assistant, Adrian drove alone to the grocery store where Naomi worked her morning shift. He waited until she finished stocking the final aisle before politely introducing himself outside, near the employee entrance. Naomi recognized him immediately from television interviews and magazine covers, though surprise was the only emotion that crossed her face. "Mr. Brooks?" she asked. Adrian offered a respectful smile. "Please." "Adrian is fine." Naomi nodded politely, but did not invite conversation. "Is there something I can help you with?" Adrian glanced toward the busy parking lot before speaking carefully. "I have seen you and your son several times over the past few days. I know this may sound unusual, but I would like to help." Naomi remained quiet. He continued gently. "I can arrange temporary housing today. No paperwork. No publicity. Just somewhere safe until you find something permanent." Naomi looked at him for a long moment before answering. Why? Adrian hesitated. Because no child should sleep beneath a bridge. Her expression softened, but she slowly shook her head. You are kind to offer. Then let me. Naomi folded her work apron neatly across one arm. If you move my son into an apartment today while every other family in the same situation stays outside, what exactly have you fixed? Adrian found no immediate answer. Naomi continued without anger, only quiet honesty. Eli deserves a safe home. So does every other little boy and little girl whose parents work hard but still fall behind. If I accept help that depends on meeting the right billionaire at the right moment, then my son learns the wrong lesson. Adrian lowered his eyes. What lesson is that? Naomi smiled sadly. That survival depends on luck instead of fairness. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of fresh bread from the grocery bakery as shoppers passed without noticing the conversation unfolding beside them. Naomi adjusted the strap of her worn backpack before speaking once more. I am grateful you stopped. Truly. But I do not need someone to rescue, only my family. She looked directly at him with calm confidence. If you really want to help, build something that still works after you walk away. Then she thanked him for his time, turned toward the library to pick up Eli after school, and disappeared into the crowd with the same quiet dignity that had first captured his attention. Adrian remained standing on the sidewalk long after she was gone. He had arrived believing money could solve the problem before sunset. Instead, a woman who owned almost nothing had shown him the difference between charity and responsibility. For the first time in years, he realized that writing one generous check would be the easiest choice he could make, and perhaps the least meaningful. The weather changed overnight. Heavy gray clouds gathered above Chicago before dawn, covering the skyline in a blanket of muted light. By late afternoon, a steady rain settled over the city, turning sidewalks into mirrors and filling the air with the quiet rhythm of falling water. Naomi picked Eli up from school beneath a shared umbrella that had already lost two of its metal ribs years ago. They laughed every time the wind pushed rain through the crooked edges. It sounds louder than yesterday, Eli said as they hurried toward the library. Naomi smiled. Rain likes to tell long stories. Do you think it gets tired? Maybe. That is why the sun always takes the next shift. Eli giggled, holding the umbrella as straight as he could while they crossed another busy intersection. They spent the next 2 hours inside the warm library, reading until closing time as thunder rolled gently outside. When the announcement finally came that the building would close, Naomi packed their books and looked through the front windows. The rain had become much heavier. She knew the tarp beneath the railroad bridge had survived storms before, but every storm carried its own surprises. Come on, she whispered. Let us go home. The word came naturally. She never replaced it with anything else. 20 minutes later, they reached the bridge. Water streamed along the curb, flowing beneath the concrete supports before disappearing into storm drains farther down the street. Naomi's heart tightened the moment she rounded the final column. One corner of the tarp had come loose under the constant wind. Rain had reached part of the shelter. The storage bins remained dry, and the mattress itself was still protected beneath 2 waterproof covers, but several blankets hanging nearby had become soaked. Eli immediately set down his backpack without complaining. I will get the clothespins, he said. Naomi smiled with quiet pride. Thank you, sweetheart. Together, they worked carefully beneath the rain, fastening the loose tarp again while shaking excess water from the wet blankets. There was no panic, only teamwork practiced through many difficult evenings. As Naomi tied the final knot, another pair of headlights slowed near the service road. Adrian stepped from his vehicle, carrying several large weatherproof storage containers and 2 folded camping tarps purchased earlier that afternoon. He had spent the previous night unable to forget Naomi's words outside the grocery store. Build something that still works after you walk away. He had not yet found the answer, but he could not ignore the storm either. He approached slowly, stopping several feet away so he would not startle them. Good evening, he called gently. Naomi turned, recognizing him immediately. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Rain tapped softly against the fresh tarp folded beneath Adrian's arm. I know you asked me not to solve this with money, he said quietly. I remember every word. Naomi listened without interrupting. Adrian looked toward the loose ropes still dripping beside the shelter. I cannot promise I know how to fix everything yet, but I thought these might help until I do. He carefully set the unopened containers on the dry pavement instead of handing them directly to her. No cameras. No reporters. No company logo. Eli looked curiously at the neatly folded tarps before glancing toward his mother. Naomi remained silent for several seconds. Finally, she nodded once. Thank you. Adrian smiled with visible relief. But before he could say another word, two city maintenance trucks slowly entered the service road beyond the bridge. Orange warning lights reflected across the wet pavement as workers stepped out carrying clipboards. One supervisor approached with an apologetic expression. Ma'am, I am sorry. We have orders to clear this maintenance area before tomorrow's rail inspection. Nobody is in trouble, but everything here has to be removed by morning. Naomi looked toward the shelter she had built piece by piece over countless nights. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked down at Eli, who quietly tightened his grip around the stuffed elephant tucked beneath his jacket. Adrian stepped forward instinctively. There has to be another option. The supervisor sighed. I do not make the rules, sir. We have been given a deadline. Adrian reached for his phone, already thinking of executives, city officials, and legal departments he could call. Then he stopped. The supervisor was not being cruel. He was following procedures created by policies, permits, and contracts that people like Adrian himself had spent years building. For the first time, all the influence attached to his name could not immediately undo the system that had quietly carried out decisions long after the signatures dried. Naomi rested one hand gently on the old floral mattress before looking toward Adrian. There was sadness in her eyes, but no anger. This is what I meant, she said softly. One person cannot outspend a system. Someone has to change it. The rain continued falling between the towering buildings and the aging bridge while Adrian stood motionless, realizing that the greatest obstacle standing before them was not the storm, nor the bridge, nor even the coming morning. It was the very machine he had helped build, and if he truly wanted to give Eli a real home, he would first have to dismantle part of the success that had made him a billionaire. The following morning, the boardroom overlooking Chicago felt unusually quiet. Rain had washed the city clean overnight, leaving sunlight to spill across the long walnut table where directors, attorneys, and senior executives gathered for what everyone assumed would be another routine strategy meeting. Adrian entered carrying only a thin folder and a folded floral quilt. Several people looked at one another with puzzled expressions, but no one spoke. He placed the quilt carefully on the center of the table before taking his seat. Before we begin, he said calmly, I want everyone here to look at this. The room remained silent. This quilt belongs to a little boy named Eli. Every night his mother spreads it across an old mattress beneath a railroad bridge because she wants him to believe he still has a bedroom. One executive cleared his throat. Adrian, with respect, I am not sure what this has to do with today's agenda. Adrian slowly opened the folder. Everything. He projected several photographs onto the large screen. None showed faces. They showed only familiar locations. The old employee housing complex before demolition. The completed Horizon East development. The railroad bridge standing only blocks away. The final image showed a weathered floral mattress covered neatly by the same quilt now resting on the conference table. Nobody spoke. Adrian looked around the room. Years ago, I approved a decision that satisfied every financial model we had. We met every legal requirement. We protected shareholder value. But somewhere between those reports and these photographs, we stopped measuring what our decisions actually cost. The chief financial officer shifted uncomfortably. No company can solve every housing problem. No, Adrian agreed. But we are responsible for the consequences of our own decisions. The company's attorney leaned forward. If this discussion becomes public, we expose ourselves to significant financial risk. Adrian nodded. I know. Investors may challenge your leadership. I know. The board could remove you as chief executive officer. Adrian looked directly at each member before answering with complete certainty. I know. He pressed another button on the presentation remote. A new proposal appeared on the screen. It outlined the creation of a permanent housing stability foundation funded personally by Adrian's shares, the restoration of employee housing partnerships, long-term relocation support extending beyond legal minimums, and a commitment that every future redevelopment project would include affordable family housing instead of eliminating it. The projected cost reached hundreds of millions of dollars over the coming years. A low murmur spread across the room. This plan will reduce profits, one director said. Adrian nodded. Yes. Our stock price could fall. Possibly. You are asking this company to accept losses because of one story. Adrian looked at the folded quilt before answering. No. I am asking this company to remember that every spreadsheet already contains thousands of stories. We simply stopped reading them. Later that afternoon, at Adrian's request, Naomi quietly entered the building carrying the carefully rolled floral mattress in a borrowed pickup truck arranged by a local community organization. She had almost refused the invitation, but after learning the meeting involved future housing policies rather than personal charity, she agreed. Security officers helped guide the mattress into the lobby, then toward the boardroom. Conversation stopped as employees watched the unusual procession. Naomi gently stood the mattress against the conference room wall. She did not deliver a speech. She did not accuse anyone. She simply rested one hand against the faded fabric and spoke with the calm honesty that had always guided her. Every night my son sleeps here because I wanted him to remember what safety feels like. I never expected anyone to rescue us. I only hoped that someday another mother would not have to choose between protecting her child's hope and protecting her own pride. The room remained completely still. This mattress is old, she continued softly. It has no market value, but it carried every bedtime story I ever read to my little boy. It carried birthdays, fevers, prayers, laughter, and promises that tomorrow would be better. That is why I kept pulling it through your city. It was never about furniture. It was about giving my son one familiar place while everything else disappeared. When she finished, she quietly stepped back without asking for applause, compensation, or sympathy. Adrian looked around the room one final time before placing his signature across the proposal. If protecting families costs me my position, he said, then my position has been too expensive for too long. No one answered immediately. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, sunlight reflected across the city skyline, reaching neighborhoods old and new alike. While inside the boardroom, a worn floral mattress stood silently beside polished conference chairs, reminding every person present that the strongest foundations were never built from concrete alone. 3 months later, the first cool morning of October settled gently across Chicago, painting the trees outside Naomi's apartment building with shades of amber and crimson. Sunlight spilled through wide living room windows, warming hardwood floors where unpacked moving boxes had finally disappeared. The apartment was not large. It did not overlook the skyline or carry luxury finishes. Its walls were simple, its kitchen modest, and every room held only what a small family truly needed. Yet when Eli ran barefoot across the floor, laughter echoed through real walls instead of beneath concrete bridges. Naomi stood by the window holding a mug of coffee while watching her son carefully arrange books on a low shelf beside his bed. Every title had once traveled back and forth from the public library inside his backpack. Now they had a permanent place to stay. Against one bedroom wall rested a brand new bed with a sturdy wooden frame and a soft blue comforter. Beside it, standing neatly upright in the corner, remained the old floral mattress. Naomi had cleaned it one final time before carrying it inside. She could have replaced it without anyone questioning the decision. Instead, she kept it exactly where Eli could see it every morning. Not because they still needed it, but because some memories deserved gratitude instead of forgetting. A gentle knock sounded at the apartment door. Eli hurried across the room and opened it with excited eyes. Mr. Brooks. Adrian smiled warmly. Good morning, Eli. He wore jeans, work boots, and a simple button-down shirt instead of the tailored suits that once seemed permanently attached to him. Behind him stood 2 volunteers carrying pieces of a wooden bookshelf that Adrian had promised to assemble himself after discovering Eli's growing collection of library books. Can I help? Eli asked eagerly. Adrian laughed softly. I was hoping you would. Together, they carried the shelves into the bedroom, while Naomi greeted the volunteers with homemade cinnamon muffins still warm from the oven. The apartment filled with the familiar sounds of people building something together. Wooden boards clicked into place. A screwdriver turned slowly. Eli proudly handed over each bolt exactly when Adrian asked for it. There were no photographers waiting outside the building. No reporters. No ribbon-cutting ceremony. Some of the most meaningful moments simply happened when nobody thought to record them. After the bookshelf was finished, Eli carefully placed every book onto the shelves before stepping back with obvious satisfaction. Now they have a home too, he said. Adrian looked toward Naomi, who quietly smiled without speaking. She understood exactly what her son meant. Before leaving, Adrian walked into the bedroom one last time. His eyes settled on the old mattress resting beside the new bed. "You kept it," he said gently. Naomi nodded. "I almost donated it." She rested her hand lightly against the faded fabric. "Then I realized I did not want to erase that part of our story." Adrian stood beside her in thoughtful silence. "Neither do I." During the months that followed the board meeting, the Housing Foundation had begun opening transitional apartments across several neighborhoods. Former employee housing partnerships had been restored. New redevelopment projects now reserve permanent, affordable homes for working families. Investors questioned the decisions at first. Some board members voted against Adrian's proposals. He stepped away from several executive privileges and sold a significant portion of his personal shares to ensure the foundation could never disappear with changing leadership. The price had been enormous. He accepted it without regret. Eli climbed onto the new bed before looking at the old mattress once more. "Mom." "Yes, sweetheart. Can we keep reading stories on that one sometimes?" Naomi laughed softly, her eyes glistening in the afternoon light. "I think that is a wonderful idea." She spread the familiar floral quilt across the old mattress, just as she had done beneath the railroad bridge. Eli curled up beside his stuffed elephant while Adrian quietly sat on the floor nearby, listening as Naomi opened another library book and gave every character a different voice. Outside, autumn leaves drifted slowly across the courtyard where children played beneath bright blue skies. Inside, the room carried the peaceful warmth that no amount of money alone could ever purchase. When the story ended, Eli looked around his bedroom and whispered, almost to himself, "This feels like home." Naomi reached over and squeezed his small hand. Adrian looked toward the old mattress one final time before quietly walking to the window. It was no longer a symbol of what had been lost. It had become proof that kindness, responsibility, and quiet courage could carry a family farther than despair ever could. And somewhere beyond the glass, beneath the same wide American sky that had once watched a mother pull a worn mattress through crowded streets, other families were beginning to find doors that opened not because they had been lucky enough to meet the right person, but because someone had finally remembered that every strong community begins by making room for hope. Thank you for staying with us until the end. This story reminds us that a person's circumstances can never reveal the full measure of their courage, and that genuine kindness begins when we take the time to understand rather than judge. Tell us in the comments what you thought of the billionaire's decision and whether you believe one unexpected encounter can truly change two lives. Please share this story with someone who appreciates meaningful stories of resilience, compassion, and new beginnings. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you can join us again for the next story. Until then, may you always have the courage to notice those who are too often overlooked. Take care, and God bless you.